reality. In this work one must learn to know the real from the invented, from the imagined, and later to separate them. Then to begin self-observation and self-study it is necessary to divide oneself into a real and an invented or an acquired side. That is, an individual must realize that they indeed consist of two people. All this takes time, however, and as long as a person takes themselves as one, as a monism, they will never move from where they are. Work on oneself starts from the moment we begin to feel separateness in ourselves. One is passive, and the most it can do is to register or observe what is happening to it. The other, which calls itself I, or me, is active and speaks of itself in the first person. It is in reality only an invented unreal person. Let us call this invented person in us, A. When someone understands their helplessness in the face of A, their attitude towards themselves and towards A in them, ceases to be either indifferent or unconcerned. Self-observation becomes the observation of A. We understand that we are not A, that A is nothing but the mask that we wear, the part that we unconsciously play and which unfortunately cannot stop playing, the part which rules us, and makes us do and say 1,000 stupid things, 100-fold things which we would never do or say ourselves. If we are sincere with ourselves, we feel that we are in the power of A, and at the same time we feel that we are not A. We begin to be afraid of A, begin to feel that A is actually our nemesis. No matter what we may like to do, everything is altered and intercepted by A. A is our adversary. A's desires, tastes, sympathies, thoughts and opinions are either opposed to our own views, feelings and moods, or they have nothing in common with them. And at the same time, A is our master. We are the slave, because we have no will of our own. Have no means of expressing our true desires, because whatever we would like to do or say is done for us by A. When a person has reached this level of self-observation, they must understand that their whole aim is to free themselves from A. And as they cannot in fact free themselves from A because it is the self, they must therefore master A and make it do. Not what the A of the given moment wants, but what they themselves want to do. From being the master, A must become the servant. The first stage of work on oneself consists of separating oneself from A mentally, and then later in being separated from it in actual fact, in keeping apart from it and maintaining distance. However, the fact must be borne in mind, that our whole attention must be concentrated upon A, for a person is unable to explain what they themselves really are. But they can explain A to anyone, and with this they must begin, remembering at the same time that they are not A. Note here that it is emphasized that we cannot change, as long as we take ourselves as one. Such as we are, right here, right now, we are not a monism, there is no unity in us, and we never truly know from one moment to the next what we will say, want, or do. Shall I have pizza? No. Ice cream? Wait, is that cake? Let's all go out for a burger and fries. When we divide ourselves into an observing side and an observed side, the first step towards possible change has been taken. That is, one must become observing I, and the other simply an acquired personality. Everything that we can then observe in ourselves must be taken as A, and A is simply an assumed, influenced, copied, and finely tuned personality. It is a defense mechanism, a firewall, designed to protect essence, which is the real I in us. Remember that if essence were to be exposed to the outside world such as it is, undeveloped, it would be shattered and overwhelmed completely, because it is yet to be more fully matured. People suppose that only one thing acts in them, and as long as they take themselves as one, they cannot think otherwise, so they find the suggestion of self-observation very difficult. What should we observe, they ask. The answer is, everything, at least to begin with. But, they reply, whatever I am able to observe is surely myself. The answer is, both no and yes, in the sense of the work. All that we observe, we must take at first as personality. This personality governs us, and the part which can observe is helpless in face of that acquired self. The order of things is wrong. The command center is in the wrong place. The inner cannot control the outer. What should command is subject, and what should be subject commands. The inner part which observes sees the outer part calling itself I, and so acting in its name, and can do nothing about that at first. Notice that the part which observes is always deeper than the part observed. The inner can observe the outer, but not vice versa. The inner can only be felt, as a kind of intuition, a gut instinct. And although the inner or observing side is helpless at first, it becomes strengthened by the ideas of the work which feeds and nurtures it. The inner can only become stronger through the work. Life cannot sustain it. A person then begins to wish to get free from personality, from the machine they are in the power of. The neutralizing force of life keeps personality active, it maintains control by A. The neutralizing force of this work nourishes our inner observing side. A person in short begins to understand that their whole aim is to free themselves from A, from their sassiness. Since we cannot in fact free ourselves from A, because it is what we call the self, we must therefore master A, and make A do, not what A of the given moment wants, but what our inner not self wants to do. From being master, A must become subservient. P.D. Ouspensky offered that this work might be termed psychotransformism. The idea of the work is psychological transformation, the transformation of oneself. Transformation means the changing of something into a different thing. Chemistry studies the possible transformation of matter, where there are well-understood transformations explained. For example, sugar can be transformed into alcohol, and alcohol into vinegar through the action of ferments. This is the transformation of one molecular substance into another molecular substance. In the chemistry of atoms and elements, radium slowly transforms itself into lead. As we know, the transformation of base metal into gold has always been investigated by alchemists of the past. However, this idea did not always have a literal meaning, because the language of alchemy was sometimes used by secret schools of teaching as referring to the possibility of the transformation of man into a new kind of man. Humanity such as it is, mechanical, serving nature and grounded in violence, was represented as base metal, and the transformation of base metal into gold referred to a possible transformation, latent in all peoples. In the Gospels, the idea of mechanical man as a seed capable of growing, has the same significance, as has also the idea of rebirth, of a person being born again. In this system of teaching, man is regarded as a three-story factory, taking in three foods: ordinary food on the lower level of the factory, air on the second floor and impressions on the third floor. The food we eat undergoes successive transformations. The process of life is itself transformation. Every living thing lives by transforming one thing into another. A plant transforms air, water, and salts from the earth into new substances, into what we call potatoes, beans, peas, nuts, fruit, and so on, by the action of sunlight and osmosis. The sensitive living films spread over the earth which conducts force from the universe, which is organic life, is a vast transforming organism. When we eat food, it is transformed successively, stage by stage, into all the substances necessary for our existence. This is done by that mind called instinctive center, which controls the inner work of the organism and of course knows far more than we do about it. We can understand that when food is taken, digestion begins. Digestion is transformation. Our food is changed into something different in the stomach. This is only the first stage of the transformation of food, and is designated in the work as the passage of DO 768 into Ray 384. We can use this first stage as an example for illustration without going further. It is a stage everyone can understand without difficulty. Everyone can see that the food taken into the lowest compartment of the three-story factory, namely the meals that we eat, undergoes transformation. Suppose the food passed into the stomach and nothing happened, what then? The body, which is like a huge town, will make no contact with it. How can an undigested piece of meat or a potato enter the bloodstream and supply the necessary fine substances, say to the brain? This situation is more or less the case, however, in regard to the third food, the food of impressions. They enter and remain undigested, that is, there is no transformation here. Impressions come in as DO 48 and stop. Save for a very small amount of transformation, nothing takes place. There is no adequate transformation of impressions. It is not necessary for the purpose of nature that we should transform impressions. But, we can transform our impressions ourselves, if we have sufficient knowledge and understand why it is necessary. Most people think that external life will give them what they crave and seek. Life comes in as impressions, as ch09. The first realization of the meaning of this work is to understand that life coming in as impressions must be transformed. There is no such thing as external life. What all the time we are receiving is impressions. We see a person we dislike, that is, we get impressions of this nature. We see a person we like, we get impressions once more. Life is impressions, not a solid material thing such as we suppose and believe is reality. Our reality is our impressions. This idea is difficult to grasp at first. It forms a very difficult crossing place. We are perhaps sure that life exists as such, but not as our impressions. The person we see sitting in a chair wearing a blue suit, smiling and talking, we think is real. No, it is our impressions of them that are real for us. If we had no sight, we would not see them. If we had no ears, we would not hear them. Life comes in as impressions, and it is here that it is possible to work on oneself, but only if we realize that what we are working on is not external life, it is the impressions that we are receiving. Unless we can grasp this, we will never understand the meaning of what in the work is called the first conscious shock. This shock relates to those impressions which are all we know of the outer world, that we are absorbing, that we take as actual things, actual people. No one can transform external life. However, everyone can transform their impressions, namely the third and highest food taken in by the three-story factory. For that reason, this system of teaching says that it is necessary to create a transforming agency at the point of intake of impressions. This is the meaning of the work regarded in the light of psychological transformation, and this is the point at which work begins. It is called the first conscious shock because it is something not done mechanically. It does not happen mechanically and so requires our conscious effort. A person who begins to understand what this means at the same time begins to be a machine no more, serving nature, a person asleep and merely used by nature for its own purposes, which is not in our best interest. If we think of the meaning of all that we are taught to do in the way of effort, beginning with self-observation, we can see beyond doubt that everything on the practical side of this work relates to transforming impressions, and the results of impressions. Work on negative emotions, work on heavy moods, work on identifying, work on considering, work on inner lying, work on imagination, work on difficult eyes, work on self-justifying, work on states of sleep, and so on is all connected with transforming impressions, and the results of them. In a sense, work on oneself is comparable to digestion, in the sense that digestion is transformation. Some transforming agency must be formed at the place of the intake of impressions. This is the first conscious shock, and it is given the general description of remembering oneself, if we are able to, through the understanding of the work. We're advised to take life as work, then be in a state of self-remembering. This state of consciousness leads to the transformation of impressions, and so of life with regard to oneself. Life no longer acts on us in the old ways. We begin to think and to understand in a new way, which is the beginning of our own transformation. For as long as we think in the same way, we take in life the same way and nothing changes in us. To transform the impressions of life is to transform oneself, and only an entirely new way of thinking can effect this. All this work is to give us an entirely new way of thinking. We are told in the work that if we are negative, it is always our own fault. The whole situation as recorded by our five senses must be transformed. But to understand this, it is necessary to begin to think in an entirely new way. We can understand that life is continually causing us to react to it. All these reactions form our life, our own personal life. To change one's life is not to change outer circumstances. It is to change our reactions. But unless we can see that outer life comes in as impressions, which cause us to react in stereotypical ways, we cannot see where the point of possible change comes in, where it is possible to begin work. If the reactions that form our own personal life are mainly negative, then that is our life. Our life is chiefly a mass of negative reactions to the impressions that have come in every day. The transformation of impressions, so they do not always provoke negative reactions, is then our task, if one wishes to work on oneself. But for this, self-observation at the point where impressions enter is necessary. Then we can let the impressions fall in a negative mechanical way, or not. If not, then that is to begin to live more consciously. If we fail to transform impressions at the moment of their entry, we can always work on the results of these impressions and prevent them from having their full mechanical effect. All this requires a definite feeling, a definite evaluation of the work, for it means that the work must be brought forward, as it were, to that point where impressions enter, and are being distributed mechanically to their customary platforms in personality, to evoke the old reactions, the old postulating, the old vitriol, the old combative and defensive emotions. No higher level is possible in ascension unless there is transformation, and the very idea of transformation is based upon the fact that different levels exist, which refers to the passage from one level to another level of being. No one can reach a higher level of development without transformation. The personality that we all acquire receives the impressions of life, but it does not transform them because it is dead. If impressions fell on essence, they would be transformed because they would fall onto inner centers. Personality, which is the term applied to all that we acquire, and we must acquire personality, translates impressions from every side of life in a limited and practically stereotypical way, according to its value systems and its associations. Our personality in this regard is sometimes compared in the work with a warehouse manager, who sits in reception, dealing with everything according to their own ideas. They have a number of dictionaries and encyclopedias or reference books and technical manuals around them, then ring up the three centers, that is the mental, the emotional and the physical centers, according to their limited ideas. The result is that the wrong centers are nearly always being rung up. This means that incoming impressions are sent to the wrong places, and produce the wrong results. A person's life depends on this administration, which mechanically looks up things in reference books without any understanding of what they really mean, then transmits them accordingly without caring what happens, but feeling only that they are doing their duty. This is our inner situation. What is important to understand in the allegory is that this personality, which we all acquire and must acquire, begins to take charge of our lives. And it is no use imagining that this only happens to certain people. It happens to everyone. However we are, we find ourselves through self-observation, possessed of a certain small number of typical ways of reacting to the manifold impressions of incoming life. These mechanical reactions govern us. Everyone is governed by their own set of reactions to impressions, that is, to life. Whether they are revolutionary or conservative, good or bad in the ordinary sense. And these reactions are their life. Mankind is mechanical in this sense. A person has formed in them a number of reactions which they take as themselves, and their life experiences are the result of them. If we can relax enough physically, then drop away mentally from all ideas of the imaginary self, which is mental distancing, then we will be able to see what is meant. We will see that, as it were, there are a number of things below us, namely, external to us, that we keep on taking as ourselves. In such a passive state we can see them dimly. At first sight they seem to be above us, and so we immediately tense our muscles, become stiff-necked and begin to verbalize, we become them. They become us or we become them, and off we go again. But one must not try to do this exercise too much at first. Actually they are like little grasping machines that insist on taking charge of us and demand that we enter them again and again. They are set in motion by this warehouse manager, that is, by the habitual way this clerk responds to impressions. And the reactions which follow we take as life. We take our typical reactions to impressions as life. We take our reactions to a person as him or her. All life, that is our outer life, which is what we usually think life is, what we see, smell, sense and hear, is for each person their reactions to the impressions coming in from it. And it is a great mistake to think that what is called life is a solid fixed thing, that it is the same for everyone. No one has the same impressions of life. Life is our impressions of it, and these can be transformed. But as mentioned, this is a very difficult idea to absorb, because the hypnotism of the senses is so powerful. We cannot help thinking that it is only the senses that give us reality. The shadows on the wall of Plato's cave. So our inner life, our real life of thought and feeling remains dim to our mental conceptions. Yet at the same time we know very well it is where we really live, that is in our own thoughts and feelings. To establish a point in the work, to make it more real than life, we must observe ourselves, and make our inner life of thoughts and feelings a fact more powerful than any fact given by the five senses. This is the beginning of transformation. One cannot transform anything in oneself if we are glued to the senses. The work teaches that if we are negative it is our own fault. The sensory point of view is that this or that person in the outer world that we sense by means of our receptory apparatus, is at fault. This person, we will say, because he or she does this or talks like that is to blame. But actually, if we are made negative, then what we have to work on, what we have to observe, is that negative emotion imposing itself in our inner life. Into that inner invisible place which is our secret garden, which is where we really exist. Our real being lies in the inner invisible world of ourselves, our mind palace. We cannot argue this point because the thoughts and feelings, the emotions and hopes, our despairs that we harbor are not less real to any of us than the tables and chairs in our dining room. Do we live as it were in this dining room? We may be very much identified with our particular tables and chairs, very comfortable and familiar, but even so it is our feeling about these tables and chairs that is real to us. Suppose then that we fell ill and perhaps felt death approaching, would we bother any more about those tables and chairs? Of course not. And why? Because we have discarded any attachment to them. It is our emotions and our ways of identifying that make us regard this or that thing as important. It is not the things that we see with our physical eyes. Suppose that a person notices that they are identified, say with this furniture. Do we think they must get rid of the furniture in order to change? Of course not, that would be silly. What they can change is their identifying. If they work on this, if they begin to transform this reaction in themselves, they can still enjoy the comfort of their furniture, but they will not grow helpless and despondent if it is destroyed in a fire. We should see the difference, that we cannot transform life, but can begin to transform the way that we take life. The first conscious shock means work on ourselves in general. The point of this work is to try to give ourselves that shock. Everything that is taught in this system, on the practical side, belongs to the first conscious shock. Non-identifying, non-considering, not internalizing and so on. This may lead to a real moment of self-remembering as a reward. Then we gain insight into what we must do, find the right path and realize the truth of this work. But work must be done in the spirit of the work. That is, in the sense and feeling and valuation of work. This must enter into every effort, for no one can work for themselves alone, otherwise the results go only into false personality, and so into merit. A person must work from love of the work. This brings hydrogen-12 up to the place of incoming impressions. Incoming impressions are hydrogen-48. They cannot pass to hydrogen-24 without hydrogen-12 as active force. If this hydrogen is present at the point of reception of impressions, at the place we are conscious, then hydrogen-48, which comes in as passive force, passes to hydrogen-24, the triad being completed by carbon-12. Hydrogen-12 is not present naturally at this point in the human mechanism. It has to be brought up to this point. So if a person takes life as usual, in the ordinary way, always receives impressions in the same mechanical format and speaks from them in the same mechanical way, acts from them with the same mechanical responses, then nothing can change in that person. Such people cannot evolve. They do not see where the point of working on themselves lies. They think work is something outside of them. A person must bring a very powerful hydrogen to the point where impressions are coming in. This is hydrogen-12. What prevents impressions from transforming themselves in us? Why does this not always happen? Impressions should pass on in their octave until they reach me12. Remember, they come in as 48, but do not continue to evolve. That the first conscious shock is to make impressions pass on in their evolution, namely to hydrogen-24 and then to hydrogen-12. That is, by means of the first conscious shock, ch09 becomes Re24 and then Me12. Two things can now be borne in mind and understood. 1. The first conscious shock does not happen to someone in sleep. It is a conscious effort requiring special knowledge and self-observation, given in connection with the incoming impressions of life and a person's mechanical reactions to them. Speaking generally, it consists of seeing the object and seeing one's reactions to it simultaneously, without being identified with the object. 2. The first conscious shock to the human machine increases the energies of the machine in the form of hydrogen-24 and hydrogen-12. The result is actually to give every cell in the body different food so they can develop and therefore transform. These are higher hydrogens. With regard to this second point, neither the psychic nor the physical functions of humanity can be understood unless it is grasped that they can both work in different states of consciousness. If the first conscious shock is applied, the third state of consciousness is touched, with the result that the human machine works in a different way, owing to new energies, both with regard to its psychic and its physical functions. The third state of consciousness is this state of self-remembering, which we should possess but which has gradually been lost through wrong conditions, caused by the hypnosis of Aristotelian logic. In modern life, this occurs in the form of rare intuitive flashes. It is the creation of this third state of consciousness that forms the first conscious shock. The initial objective of work is to recover this lost state, to make us remember ourselves until eventually we do not merely have rare flashes of increased consciousness over which we have no control, but can create in ourselves an increasing degree of self-remembering through deliberate effort. These efforts, which belong to the first conscious shock, gradually cause our machine to work better. Many wrong functions both in our psychic and physical being are acquired through the wrong working of our mechanisms in the two lowest states of consciousness, in darkness, whence they begin to disappear of themselves. Returning to the question of what prevents ch48 from passing on to Re24, and then to Me12. Why does this not always happen? Because it occurs in childhood, then to a certain extent Me12 is created in the body during early youth, but we can vaguely remember its action. However, as personality grows more and more thickly around essence, it happens less and less. Impressions are more and more intercepted by personality, and we become jaded. Impressions coming in through the senses fall onto a thick net which catches everything, save a very small part that slips through, which can pass onward and produce a very small amount of Me12. This net is personality, with its strong buffers, its fixed attitudes, its mechanical associations, its automatic rolls or swells and waves set in motion by currents, where the ideas that it knows convince it that it can do, with all of its contradictory eyes, with all of the different forms of negative emotion, acquired through pressuring and imitation, with all of its habits of identifying, considering, self-justifying, imagining and lying, rooted in false personality. All these prevent impressions from passing on in normal transformation. In other words, something opaque, like cataracts, has formed at the place where impressions enter and obscured the way for their passage onward. From the standpoint of triads, impressions entering as hydrogen-48 cannot pass to hydrogen-24 unless hydrogen-12 is present. Hydrogen-12 must be brought up to the place where impressions are entering. Personality is constructed mainly out of hydrogen-48, formatly hydrogen or worldview, so we have impressions 48 falling on personality 48, and since the necessary elements of a triad are therefore lacking, no transformation is possible. In the case of food, ordinary food, hydrogen 768 at intake meets with gastric juices and active bacteria belonging to the order of hydrogen 192. The result is the transformation of 768 into 384. But in the case of impressions, once personality is formed, no corresponding ferment culture meets them, in this case hydrogen-12. The work itself must be brought up to this place, acting as a ferment, for the work is to make us think in a new way, and to awaken. What does this mean? How can we bring the work up to the place of incoming impressions? By remembering the work emotionally, through feeling. The more that we through right self-observation feel our own helplessness, the more we realize our ignorance, see our mechanicalness, that we are automatons, the more we perceive our utter nothingness, the more emotional will the work become to us. This work can exist as hydrogen-48 where it lies simply in personality, as something formatory in memory, like grammar or spelling. It can also exist in us as hydrogen-24. Then it becomes emotional and therefore valuable, important in that it begins to have the intensity of meaning, significance that belongs to hydrogen-12. In that case, false personality will begin to collapse and we can become as a little child. This is one meaning of the passage, except ye become as little children. If our love no longer runs always into the self, into our habitual ideas, our strange vanity and narcissism, into false personality, then the direction of our will changes. The result of our desires alters. When the valuation of the truth of esoteric teaching becomes stronger than self-valuation, it begins to act on us. We begin to take everything differently and the way in which we react to outer life changes. We need to understand that life is simply impressions. If we no longer react to impressions from mechanical personality, always saying the same things, feeling the same things, and begin instead to act from the work, in quite a new way, then everything changes. The work comes up to the place where life is entering as impressions and stands alongside us. We begin to see life through the work, and instead of wasting time in hundreds of forms of useless internal considering or negative reactions, of identifying, we seek the power of the work for change and begin to live more consciously.